All right, let's get into our hypothetical writers route for the next 20 minutes, and then we'll speed run through DS9 episode 3 and 4. So, for those of you that have been following us, we're trying a new thing, and by trying a new thing, this is just what we're doing regardless of if it's popular or not, because we want to start actually coming up with original content. Now we have a parody project as a result. So,
trying a new thing, we mean we're getting good. Eventually, this will be a new thing.
Right. Yeah. So, what we have is we've started, but I should probably start writing these notes down, or I should add both of you guys to the Google account so you guys can start working on it so we could actually take these notes when we want to actually put this together. So what we came up with was a hypothetical Star Wars show about the first Jedi and Sith. And I think what we were going to have is that it was probably going to, I had some crazy idea about it being born out of like multiple factions. So then it gets, corralled into one or two factions. And yeah, I think that there's a better way to go about it than the idea I had. But the point of this is we want to take the stuff that we like out of Andor and Ahsoka and even on the other Star Wars properties we mentioned. And we want to get ideas out there that we want to see in future properties going forward. Now, we don't actually expect our project to be picked up by Disney, as great as that would be. But we do hope that at the very least we encourage that we, by highlighting, not just highlighting the stuff we like in Andor and Ahsoka, but putting the pieces of both of those things together into one idea that they could potentially take and realize that, okay, we do have stuff that we can salvage from Disney. So,
okay, I want to add two major things to that. So number one, Disney, this is a pitch deck. Like, this is the best we're ever going to do because you're a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate and you don't have a guy. I've Googled it. I've tried to figure out how to submit pitch decks to Disney. It's really hard. I have no idea how to do it to this day. I don't know anybody in your corporation. So if
a lot of it involves getting shit on your nose.
and you think, do these guys want to actually work here? Yes, this is our proof of concept. This is what we want to try to do based off what we've seen before. But then on number two, like, I think a lot of us are saying the same things, but with different words because we don't want to copy each other. And Disney is reading that as a bunch of people saying a bunch of things that don't line up. And that, I think, is another thing to do with this writer's room is, none of us believe the same things about the universe. All of us have our own relationships to what we believe, where we came from, how we got here, where we are, and who we are as individuals. And in that instance, Disney, this is a real-time audience desire for the future. So you can take this, as a grain of salt, or you can take this as a bunch of individuals, the four of us, educated in writing, educated in entertainment, and educated in your products, obviously more than you are, desiring a specific outcome that also is clearly general. We're not trying to restrict anybody. We're just trying to organize it.
Yeah. So with that, I think one of the first things that we need is basically what Corione touched on in the Ahsoka discussion, is that we need to plan on, so for this series, I think very basic sword fights and very just raw and unchoreographed fights are going to be the way to start this thing. Like, somebody doing a jump over slice kill needs to be like a super rare, game-changing, big deal event. Otherwise, the fights, they're going to have to just be like even worse than episode 4, if that's possible.
Bro, okay.
Actually, okay.
Point, this is something I wanted to add to that so much real quick. Corione's talk about the coordinated, true on-the-ground sword fight, that is the epitome of an honorable warrior versus an honorable warrior, which is like the vision of light side versus dark side where they respect each other. And that's like the yin and yang of Star Wars. So whenever two opposite forces fight like that, that is like, we are going to actually see who's better. And that's such an awesome entanglement. But on your point, Parker, what if, because what we had talked about last time was like these two two people finding the Force on an island, right? So what if the on the ground sword fights start out as just them going back to basic training? So like, it's two guys.
Force fist fight.
Actually, Scogli, hear me out on this, because I think I've got this. I think I've got what you guys are going for. So
Cool.
we have our two castaways, if you will. They're on this, they're starting to learn the Force, and one of the events I want to have happen is the blaster that they've been using to hunt food runs out of power. They don't have a way now to hunt. So they're going back through the archives. They're learning techniques, and they've realized they can use their fists to project a little bit of Force energy to fight with. Now, what they're going to do is we're going to borrow a page from, believe it or not, Chinese mythology. Because what's going to happen is they're going to realize this, but they've never actually fought before. So they're going to watch the animals in their environment and start copying the movements, as in, like, for example, the different types of kung fu. And one of them is going to focus on a creature very similar to the crane style in kung fu that's very defensive. The other one is going to be focusing on a creature like a tiger, very fast attack, ambush predator style movements. And eventually they're going to come back together after studying these and go, hey, I figured out some stuff. And they're going to try it up against each other and realize that they're counterpoints to each other. And they're going to use them both to hunt, and hunt successfully. And bring that back. And that's going to start the basis. And what we're going to do is we're going to start the basis for the lightsaber, the 7 lightsaber forms, based on 7 animals that they see hunting and working in nature on this island. So they wind up developing the very basics of the 7 forms of lightsaber combat based on a martial art they're developing.
And where does the sword come from? The older one watched their dad or father figure, or even both their families, or just remembers that there was a sword version of Tai Chi in their culture. So like he's just doing that as stretching, and it's just with a stick because he has no sword.
Yeah.
And then they start to combine it to each other. So then like you're saying, all of these fighting combat styles, just like kung fu in terms of like jiu-jitsu as well, like the idea of watching 2 dogs wrestle and realize that they're not trying to like kill each other, but they are
Force
still
judo.
trying to dominate each other, but also they can't jeopardize the pack by hurting each other. So it has to be different, and dogs figure it out. So why can't we, right? Judo too. But then if you add on top of there, like the idea that just one of them is waking up every morning, just doing these like sword swings that are like stretches, and he does it with a stick because that's what the culture had, and he talks regularly about performing it with a formal saber, like their version of like a, not necessarily like a holy item, but a legitimate cultural item that they
It was a
always-
cultural exercise. They
Exactly.
were only doing it just to be healthy, not
Yeah,
because they
and-
needed to use it. Because at that point, they've
No,
got
like, that's
blasters. Why
why-
would they need to?
Well, that's why I touch on Tai Chi, because Tai Chi is perfectly universally applied. You can be whatever religion you are and still do Tai Chi and benefit from it. So like if we invent a Star Wars Tai Chi with a sword or a saber, and then like these kids are trying to mimic it and create it, but at the same time they're also trying to learn hunting and combat and war and fighting nature to eat and survive. But then also, and this to me I think is where it needs to be the most important, because this is like what Star Wars was always about, which is iron sharpens iron, the practice. You try to sneak up on me and we'll see if your defensive technique is as good as you think. You try to attack me and see if your aggression is as good as you think. And they just keep sharpening each other. And all we're watching is a literal power escalation. And to me, like all the like big that they do is because like their relationship with the Force is so natural that they are the original Darth Plagueuses. Like, they were the myth that Darth Plagueis mythologized. Like, two people did get it right, and they were also enemies. But they weren't enemies. It was always yin yang. They were always best friends forever. And we watched that just like, and we watch how they compete because they're actually trying to win together. Like, I think Good Omens would be an amazing reference to bounce off of. Amazon Prime series Good Omens. They do that where it's Angel and Demon teaming up to stop the end of the world. And this is where it's a lot of that like chaotic dark and that like benevolent light, and the two trying to work together because they actually care about each other, and we see what that looks like. And that's
Seen it. I don't like
it. I think we can do it better. Like, right?
I won't even want to go with better. I would rather let's I like the start of where this idea is, but I think we need to go a step further. We need to go different. We need to go like a little bit more of an in-depth origin story. Like, these mechanics that you guys are talking about are good, but I'm starting to think that what if we do it like so Star Wars likes to claim that it's poetry, and I can see the argument there. I'm not entirely convinced, but I could also see like where it works in, but even in a general sense, everything's connected.
I would consider it
I think
very solid American attempt at poetry.
I think that what we should do is start with, like, I like what Corione is saying, having a blaster for hunting. That's a good premise. But I think it should be an entire group of people that basically come up with the new fighting style. And then what we have out of that is you're just holding me back from learning the real stuff. And that's where we have the split, is like, it starts with, okay, a group of well-reasoned individuals that were learning new powers and that were creating like the first actual Jedi Order. That way the first fall of the Jedi is in fact a Jedi themselves that was jealous of thinking they weren't getting the proper training and attunement. And we can even have it be somebody who might have a higher talent. We could literally kind of have like a mirrored Anakin Skywalker moment where it's somebody that's like, no, I've got so much power, I can learn stuff. But the masters are like concerned about you learning so quickly because they don't know. And it's all out of fear of the unknown. It has nothing to do with, you might fall to the dark side. We don't even know that there's a dark side. It's literally just fear of the unknown. And that's what starts the first Jedi and Sith conflict. But I think it should be like groups of people. Not just two brothers helping out, but two brothers are part of it, but like 5 or 6 different people that all learn different techniques, and they're slowly learning in the Force, and then that's what they end up training each other on.
I think we start it with the two brothers, and then I think what we get is once they've got a little bit of knowledge, just enough knowledge, and they're at the point where they're beyond regular survival, they're starting to look at building a life. We have a second ship crash. And that brings on a group of people. And our brothers find this group of people and they go, look, we've been surviving here for over a year now. We'll help you. We'll guide you.
The planet that they crash on, by the way, is Tython.
Cool.
On top of all of this, the adults and the kids. So these two brothers are still young, right? And so they maintain distance, and so they approach peers, right? The children. But then when they meet the adults are like, no, we know what to do. And the kids are like, the brothers are like, you guys have no idea what to do. And so the adults try to trap the kids as if they're natives, because they basically look native. And that's when we start to see the escalation of the Force against regular society to some degree. But then we also get the first followers. Like, maybe some of the kids, like maybe it's like not all of the adults are the parents of the kids. It's some survivors Some of them
Well,
are kids.
what I
some
what
of
I
them
like
are
about-
parents, some of them are adults.
I'd actually
Not
go
all
a
of them
step
are related.
further and tease conflict, but then it ends up like everybody ends up working together at first, and so we actually delay it
Oh.
until somebody else
Season
comes
2.
along. They're starting. So here's what I'm thinking. We start with those two, and they start teaching each other, right? Then another group of people shows up or whatever. They crash or whatever. And then they realize, oh, you guys have powers too, but everybody's level's different. Each person's discovering a new power, and that's what they're doing is they're training each other on these new abilities that they find. Then the caveat comes in. And the caveat is somebody who is quickly able to learn all of these powers and quickly starts discovering all these other powers. And that's when like the masters or the overseers, the adults are like, okay, you need to slow down because we have no idea what's going to happen. But then the other person's like getting antsy, like, no, I can figure all this out. I can do it. I can control it. And then that's when we start learning.
Worst thing ever happens. They're all rescued and returned home.
That could work too.
Yeah.
So everybody that has powers has powers. Everybody that belongs together, none of them are where they belong anymore because they were sent to where they were supposed to be originally. But with all of these changes, and now the infection starts.
Oh, dude, I got it. Here's what happens. After everyone has started getting powers and everyone is starting training and things are going along, a rescue ship arrives, and the group decides after the rescue ship comes down and they're on board the ship, guys, we need to go back and study this. So they get the gear they need to found a small colony and intentionally head back to the planet.
Some do. And that's the difference, is we get some, the main characters, going back to stay, actually start an outpost. They actually even get funding because the rescue ship is all about that independent, individual research stuff, starting your own colony, get your 40 acres. But then at the same time, the ones that were on the crash ship that never intended to be there, and they've only been there for like 6 months, including Parker's character, the super learner, who's actually like way too privileged.
Yeah.
So
All right.
he's just an ass.
John, you got to cycle
Gets
again.
sent home.
Gotta reboot you. Yeah, sorry, you're cutting out with more electronic interference. So what I do want to add to that though, real quick, and probably wait for him to come back though, is I realized what I said is I just realized the multi-faction Jedi Force user thing is an inevitability for this story. It's gonna have to be that way. So it's gonna end up having to come down to that. Yes, there's a dark side and light side. They end up having to condense it down because, as what you're suggesting, John, is when they go off and disperse into the back into the galaxy, the ones that don't return, they're not necessarily going to create Sith. They're just going to create their own things, and that's what's going to happen. And so that's where we could actually end up having this. Okay, we need to make it easier for people to understand the light path and dark path, and so that's why the first group of Jedi that build the first lightsaber, they end up coming up with the two faction system to mitigate any confusion, because that's just how it naturally goes with religion. You're going to have different interpretations.
What if it starts out not as a light side, dark side, but as a duopoly that slowly grows into two opposing forces? Because like it starts out as like these two brothers that are like, you need to get the warriors in check. Well, you need to get the healers to stop doing weird necromancy.
Well, that's
stuff.
getting like super
so
deep
they're
into
like,
it later.
Because like instead of like automatically starting out with the light side and dark side,
no, it doesn't start that way. No,
seen,
right, that's what I'm saying. Is
Right,
that each faction's going to have some weird distorted version of Jedi Sith ideas, and each of them are going to be so different by the time that they're found.
What if it's way closer to, like normal history, human history, in the sense that like they're not distorted so much as like every time it works out, okay.
What works
but every
out?
time it doesn't, like any force power. So like force lightning is awesome when you're powering generators and healing a city, lightning for a show, some pageantry, dope. Lightning somebody, you're a Black Witch murderer, right? So like one society sees lightning as Black Witch, One society sees it
You know what
as
we're gonna
pageantry,
need?
and we keep seeing that with each force power.
witch
is
hunt?
like
No, you know what we're gonna
not a
need?
witch hunt. Some of them are using. It's literally the definition of like magic. Use it for wrong, you're a bad person. Use it for good, you're a good person. And that's where we really start to understand the true dichotomy of the light side versus dark side. It was always about what you do with what you can do, because technically you can do it all.
What
that's
we
why I love
need
Jedi Knight.
at some point, like when you guys are talking about like down the road point, we need a Council of Nicaea. We need a point where all the
That's what I'm saying.
here's how you do it too. Here's how you absolutely do it. Enough force users start showing up that the government is seriously considering starting to regulate force power.
And many
And they get
governments
together-
already have.
Right. And they all get together at one point to say, we're going to regulate ourselves so you don't have to. And they have this council meeting with every force user they possibly can on like Jadoon and go, guys, we're going to sit down. We're going to sort out what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable, blah, blah, blah. And what winds up happening is the schism occurs because there's a disagreement on what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. And one group, after this arguing and debate, stands up and walks out and goes, you know what? We're sick of this argument. We're sick of this discussion. We're leaving.
One small segment gets up and leaves, right? But then slowly more people follow them.
Yeah.
And
as
that's
things
where
get-
we really start to see where we're at with the force. But it's still like the rules are dumb. Like the rules are still human. Like they haven't limited force abilities. They haven't regulated emotions. They haven't regulated psychopaths from sociopaths, from empaths, from because that's something that wasn't very clearly discussed in the prequel trilogy, but was hinted at. Like one of the reasons why Anakin wasn't allowed to be trained was because he was too old, which again, shout out to George Lucas. Nowadays we find out if you're over 7 years old, that's almost too late to stop psychoism or socioism, right? So the fact that George Lucas wrote
Well,
that
it's
in
like
Star
any
Wars,
religion.
can
You gotta
apply
get them
that.
young.
Yeah.
Not every religion is like that, though, Scogli. I could have a good
No,
discussion
the corrupt
about that.
ones are, but that's a discussion for the road council.
But young more in terms of not yet destroyed by the world, too young to have an actual negative foundation. And that apparently, according to modern psychology for humans, that's 7 years old. And in this
Before the
instance,
age
there's
of
no
reason.
way that any of the Council of Nicaea, Jedi Council of Nicaea, would have that level of research. They haven't banded together yet. So I think the schism, Corion, it shouldn't be the rules. It should be the rule bearers. One
Yeah.
group is like, no, we should be autonomous groups, covens, that take care of the covens and deal with our business internally. And the other's like, no, we should be a federal group, an actual nation state within the galaxy. And that is the schism. They're like, no, we want autonomy, especially because you don't know what it's like to live on our planet. And they're like, no, we'll learn. And that's the argument we start to find. And then we see, because I don't want either side to be right. I
No,
want
and that's
both
the
sides
really
to
important
be
part.
obviously equally right and wrong.
Jonathan G94 says Ahsoka Chapter 5 was fantastic. Well, spoilers. Now I have my expectations set high. No, we appreciate the enthusiasm. Please keep it contained to that, or, well, the hammer comes down until Ahsoka's
please-
over.
Jonathan, we love that. Please don't spoil.
Yeah.
You did an amazing
We
job.
don't
there.
want to ban people, but if you ban if you spoil a show that's currently running, you get the hammer until the show's over. Nemesis of Eden says, are you saying you don't want Lord of the Flies style situation with Force users? I'm not opposed to that, but I'm not opposed to elements of that, and I think that's what we're trying to do with this idea, is that we need to flesh out what our foundations are. We got a lot to think about. Jonathan G. says, no spoilers. Thank you, Jonathan G. You are why the human race is great.
Well, and I think Lord of the Flies is awesome, but what if we combine adults and like all the age ranges.
What
But
if we
then
can?
we also still have all of their education involved in well. So it's not so much a Lord of the Flies with a complete lack of order or any inspiration for order, because Lord of the Flies, they literally had no understanding of order. But we add a little bit spice.
So,
but after a couple of
so
them,
yeah,
we've
so
already
we got
it.
some things to think about for our writers' room when we get back into session next week.